In today's show, we have another multi-topic episode where first we discuss when did we stop trusting mass media? And secondly, we discuss media blackout? What media blackout?
And now, the TNT Talk Show, daring to go where other podcasts fear to tread.
Hello, I'm Tony Fasulo, and I share the stage with my esteemed friend and colleague, Tayo Boya. Tayo, hello, my friend, once again. I hope you're keeping safe and well.
Yeah, what the hell, Tony? What you gonna do, eh?
Come on, say hello to our audience. Come on, tradition, keep it going. Come on, you've been doing well the last few weeks.
Okay, hello, audience.
Yay!
What a life.
I'm so pleased.
I know you are. At this point, I usually share some kind of story or whatever with you, but this time, I'm genuinely happy because I found a new shop in Northampton. It's a new big man's shop. You know, a big man shop for the extra tall and the extra large.
Okay.
Yeah, I found one, and I think that I love the shop. The folks there are really helpful. They're very welcoming and everything, and I was seriously impressed. And I thought I'm going to actually mention this on our podcast. I mean, for example, I bought this one shirt, which for some reason was picking up a lot of static electricity. You know, those kind of shirts or whatever. You know, you pick up a lot of. This was picking up a lot of static electricity.
What, nylon?
Yeah, but it wasn't nylon. That's a funny thing. It didn't feel like nylon, but it was some kind of. It must have been synthetic, but it was really close to like the real thing, and I couldn't tell. But everything I touched, it was absolutely shocking. Anyway, I took it back there, and they just gave me another one free of charge.
Okay. What? What? What, free of charge? I don't get it.
Yeah, another one free of charge. You like?
What?
They
Free
gave me
of
another
charge. Oh, I've just got it now. That was so bad. That was so bad. Free of charge.
So you get a groan, I get a groan. Hey, this is the whole point of this segment.
Free of static charge. Yes, very good. Oh dear.
Charge,
Please do not give up your day job. That is so bad. Anyway, let's move on with the show.
When you
now,
put your
obviously,
head in your hands, I'm really happy.
okay.
Yes.
Now, hopefully, time permitting, we will try and cover more than one topic, but we want to kick something off here. This is really a question that we just want to discuss, is when did we stop trusting the mass media? Now, I know I asked for this topic, but I think you actually came up with this idea a few months back. So can I ask you to maybe summarize why there's a distrust of the mass media? What's your
I
reasons?
can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself. Why I distrust the mass media, and it's because when RT and Sputnik and what was the other one, TASS, the Russian news services, were proscribed in the West, our mass media said nothing. Now, I thought we were supposed to be the bastions of free speech. How come no one stood up and said, look, the way to fight disinformation is to show it up? I mean, I wonder how many people are aware that during the Second World War, we still didn't stop Nazis from broadcasting. Well, actually, we shouldn't say that if we want to be on YouTube. We still didn't broadcast that particular regime, 1930s, 1940s German regime, from broadcasting into our country.
But wasn't that more to do with the fact that radio, because that's all it was at the time, was less prevalent, and obviously the authorities didn't know.
Less prevalent?
Well, it was everyone was listening to the radio, but
Yeah.
it wasn't that influential, I suppose. Maybe they didn't believe it was and let it carry on. Whereas nowadays, they they know a lot more about how, you know, social media in particular influences people in a negative way. So hence they thought they would shut down those services. But you're right, in a democratic society, free society, you should let them carry on. But
No, that wasn't the reason why. We didn't shut them down, but they shut us down. So they knew the power of it. So they shut us down. And if you remember, Soviet Union shut us down. But we let the Soviet Union blabber
broadcast.
on, broadcast. We didn't shut them down, but you couldn't get the BBC in Russia. I mean, I think we tried, but it was always there was always like static and all this sort of thing over it, and you couldn't hear properly. I remember growing up. I mean, this was even in sort of past the heyday of this sort of thing that we were still saying, you can't even get the BBC and stuff because they're still making sure that our signal doesn't reach the population over there. So they were practicing that, but we were the ones saying we are an open society. We let everybody broadcast. That was what made us proud. That's what we were proud of. That's why we said we were the goodies, because we weren't afraid of the other side's argument.
So what's the reason here now then?
And the
Why have
reason
we stopped RT
because
and the rest of it?
because 90+% of our media is owned by 6 giant corporations. So controlling it is so much easier. That's the reason. It's possible now to control it. When you had literally hundreds of thousands of owners, how could you stop information from getting out? So whilst we thought that we were good because we were good, actually we were good because the system lent itself to goodness. Do you see what I mean? Our government wasn't intrinsically good. It
They
wasn't
just
good in
couldn't
itself.
stop it then.
They just couldn't stop it. But the moment that they could stop it, as we have seen, they have.
Do
So they're
you,
not really good people. But they're not. Our government by no means are the goodies.
do you remember a radio station called Radio Caroline?
Yes, it was
And
a ship. Oh, it was
that
on
was
a
a
ship,
ship,
wasn't it?
yeah, yeah.
A ship.
And the government couldn't stop it
Yep.
because it was broadcasting from a ship offshore.
25 miles offshore.
Yeah, so it was
Because that was
outside
just
our
outside the
jurisdiction.
24
Yeah,
outside the 24-mile limit. It was
yeah,
actually a brilliant
it
idea.
was. It's very clever.
Yeah.
But now, why has that been stopped?
I believe. Well, I can't remember why Radio Caroline ended. I don't know whether they got them on tax or something. I can't remember what they got them.
Block them, maybe?
No, no, no. I think they got them on tax or something. Revenue streams, because you're still broadcasting. You're still trying to make money, aren't you?
I
In the
don't
United,
know. I don't
in the
know if
United,
they even exist.
in the United Kingdom. I mean, that was Kenny Everett's show, wasn't it? The Kenny Everett and all of them. They came up
Really?
that way, didn't they?
I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
they came. I believe they came up that way. Yeah, they got them on something technical. That's what I believe, and they shut them down. But it wasn't by blocking the signal. I mean, they could. They could always block the signal, but blocking the signal in those days would have raised a lot of serious eyebrows. That hey, we don't do that, sort of thing. So I don't think they went down that route. Nowadays, of course, they just shut you off. They just don't care.
So, I mean, you said you started distrusting the media since this conflict. Weren't you distrusting of the media prior to that, though?
There was a big difference between what RT was saying and what BBC and CNN and the others were saying. But I liked getting both sides of the story. So I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily just follow the RT route. I wanted to hear what Al Jazeera thought. I wanted to hear what the BBC thought. And you got sort of different perspectives. But there was an increasing disconnect between my understanding of what the radio stations, sorry, what these broadcast stations were saying and what was happening in reality. So initially, you the argument was this thing is tinged slightly blue. Excuse me. This thing we're looking at, RT thinks is tinged slightly blue, and BBC thinks it's tinged slightly red. Well, you can say to yourself, well, that's just a question of perception, and just the differences of how people look at it. But when somebody says this is a cube, and the other person said this is a sphere, and you look at it, and it's a cube, it's no longer a question of differences of opinion. It's someone isn't being accurate. And I think that is the problem that once the war broke out in Ukraine, the authorities couldn't let that clear divide stand anymore. When someone could say certain things, A, B, C, and D, and the other person said E, F, G, H, but reality was closer to A, B, C, D than it was to E, F, G, H. And so a lot of people were like,
We don't want our population to hear this.
We definitely don't want our population to hear this.
Is it because they feel that would then erode any sort of support that there's currently in process? Because if more and more people hear an alternative view, because at the minute we've only got one viewpoint and it's what we're being fed. So are we any better off than one of these tin pot dictatorships? Because if our media is only giving us one narrative, we're not seeing the full picture. We're getting a skewed view. Hence, a lot of people are thinking a particular way. But maybe that is the objective of the governments in the West. They want their populations to think a certain way in order to keep supporting what their agenda is, or whatever that may be, in Ukraine. I don't know. I mean, I haven't got the answer.
It's bigger than Ukraine. It's bigger than Ukraine. Ukraine was the jump off point for these governments to what's their expression? Is it to show their true color? Yeah, to show their true colors. That was the jump off point when the governments actually began to show their true colors. Before then, I think it was increasingly obvious that we were being lied to, but the extent to which we were being lied to was not apparent until this crisis in Russia and Ukraine. And after that, when the governments needed the public to go along with their agenda, then they showed their true colors. And now we can see that it's gotten to the point now where, in all truth, I just automatically accept that whatever the BBC says about government policy and things like that, okay? I don't mean about football and stuff and entertainment. Okay. Yeah. But whatever the BBC, CNN, and these Western media, what I suppose I'd always describe as the legacy media in the West, whatever they say about government policy, I automatically assume is a lie. I mean, I just...
What, do you think they're puppets of the government now?
I believe that they are. Yes, they are puppets.
But the government, in particular in the UK, though, has got umbrage with the BBC because they believe that the BBC is too left-leaning. So surely the BBC can't be the voice, the mouthpiece of the government, because the government...
No, you're right. You're right. And so it's not really fair to say the government. It's better to say the establishment. What in America, I don't think we have an equivalent term here. What in America is called the deep state. Have you heard of that expression?
Yes, yeah.
That's what we will call the maybe the grey suits. I don't know I don't think we even have that expression in the UK. But the people behind, well, I suppose we say the establishment, by which we mean the unelected officials in Whitehall. Right?
Are we talking about the civil service?
Yeah, but the not the sort of Joe Blogs and what's the female equivalent of a Joe Blogs?
Joe Blogs?
There
was a female
Jane, I don't know.
Jane Doe is someone who they can't identify, yeah.
Okay, so the Joe blogs and the female equivalents in the civil service, the ordinary people, just we don't mean them. We mean the mandarins, the people who go to private clubs, that you and I can't join. That's sort of those are the sort of people, and these are
So
the
you
people right at the
is this
top.
more a conspirasy now that these people in grey
It's not a
suits are
conspiracy.
running the show as
It's
opposed to
not
the
a
government?
conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. We've got Elon Musk showing that CIA and the Department of Defense and Homeland Security and MI6, which MI6 is increasingly emerging as the tail that wags the American dog, which is very peculiar. I don't understand why.
Really?
But yeah. There's a lot of evidence that MI6
Is the lead
more
in all this?
is more powerful than you would expect. That it just gets quite a lot of its way, quite a lot of the time, and
Interesting.
it's the tail that is wagging the American dog. Because of this, the people in America called the neocons,
Hmm.
they seem to be in cahoots with these people here, this narrow section of our society. And what was I going to talk about? Oh yeah. So Elon Musk, he's shown that a lot of voices that were silenced were at the behest, and that's why I went off about MI6, at the behest of MI6 and the CIA and people like that. And then there are other people who are promoted again, because I mean, one of them is quite a famous, quite a famous outlet called Bellingcat. I don't know if you've heard of them.
I've heard of Bellingcat. Yeah. If you want to
Yeah, well,
enlighten our
well,
listeners and
Bellingcat
watchers,
is I mean, the Western press loves Bellingcat. It's a think tank, almost. It's an organization which supposedly supports bringing the truth to light and shedding light on malfeasance in foreign nations and sometimes even in our nation. But it is being conclusively shown. I mean, I can even it's so conclusively shown that I can even say without fear of libel or slander that is actually a lot of MI6 influence. I think it meant several of their members are ex MI6
right?
people. So when they say stuff, and when they come out with things like oh, YouTube, the so-called so-called war crimes in Ukraine, in a particular town
Hmm.
where some people said that the Russians were killing
Yeah, I
civilians.
remember
And it's
that
like,
early on in the conflict. Yeah.
well, that was a Bellingcat story, and the aspects of it which don't make any sense because the people who were shot were actually Russian supporters by and large. So we don't know why Russians were shooting their own supporters with their hands tied behind their backs and so on and so forth. But you
Okay.
wouldn't have heard that at the time, would you? At the time, you didn't hear any of that, and you still wouldn't hear any of that from our mass media. It's very difficult when you find out. You go, if I'm finding out and I'm a numpty in the Midlands in America in the UK, how come the people who've got their fingers on the pulse, the journalists of international repute, how come they didn't know that? It's impossible to
Well,
believe
that
that.
would indicate that maybe your sources may not be properly informed, but they are just on the fringe. So you're maybe looking at information which is point blankly dismissed as being wrong. So that could be why. It just seems a bit. You could either look at it in two ways. The first one is that your information is false, and all the journalists know that, and they know that the locations that you're referring to are clearly tinged and not right. Or two, the more far-fetched one is that all the journalists are all controlled and their narrative is dictated to by a higher group, so they can't report on these lower, smaller, independent news outlets because they've got to follow a particular narrative.
Well, if you watch CNN, a CNN interview, I think there was a British admiral, trying to remember if it was CNN or someone, a British admiral, about maybe today's the the 4th of October, and this interview I'm referring to took place say in the last week, maybe about 5 or 6 days ago, and I forget the name of the admirals. I forget the admiral's name. If you watch that interview, you'd be tearing your hair out because there are very obvious questions when he was making ridiculous statements about the Ukrainian war, about how Ukraine can do this and Ukraine can do that, and if you know anything about the Ukrainian war, you could say, well, sorry, if they could do that, why are they not? Well, why are they stuck here? What has happened here? Questions that you could ask, and the interviewer never asked those questions. Whatever ridiculous statement he made was never challenged.
That's a poor
It's
interviewer,
difficult.
though, isn't it? That
Well,
doesn't mean
that is a repeated motif. So how many of these interviews are you going to watch until you think, hang on, what's going on here? If it was a one-off, Taya wouldn't be talking about it. It's not a one-off. It's a tradition almost.
isn't this similar to what happened on? I can name them because it was actually part of the news just recently on GB News being wrapped across the knuckles because they were not having impartial debates. Because, for instance, some of sitting Conservative MPs have shows on GB News, and so what they were doing was interviewing other cabinet members of the Conservative Party on their show. And so you've got a openly conservative Minister of Parliament hosting a show interviewing a fellow Conservative who's a minister, and not really putting them over the coals because they were in essence agreeing with them. So what sort of interview is that? You've got to have opposite views to make the interview worthwhile, which is what we try and do on our show, because you and I are chalk and cheese. We are different. And so when we discuss topics, we by and large have differing viewpoints, so we can hopefully give a more balanced opinion and of the topic in question, and we hopefully give two different viewpoints. Sometimes it's not that way inclined, but the majority of the time we have succeeded in that affair. But going back.
Sorry.
Go on.
To answer that,
Yeah.
it's okay to have Conservative MP interviewing Conservative cabinet members if the show is called View from the View from the Green Bench or whatever you want to call it. View from the from the Tory view or whatever. So it's fine. You say this is what it is, and people know what it is, and then because I believe it's Ofcom rules, you give an equal amount of time to the View from the Labour benches. So they got their little show. That's fine. That's what the BBC used to do. The BBC used to have. It wasn't that you had to have a Palestinian on whilst you were talking to an Israeli. It wasn't necessary. What it was necessary was that after you'd had 6 or 7 minutes for the of the Israeli on, you had 6 or 7 minutes for the Palestinians on. So you could, viewers had both points of view.
Yeah.
So that's fine, and nobody's complaining. Do you remember? I don't know. Are you even aware of how people like me? I'm a Brexiter. How we felt about the BBC, because at one point it was like a 94 representation of the Remainer that was represented on the BBC, and only 6% was Brexit, were Brexiters. So again, this is like, that is not what and that is when I began saying myself, and when I eventually stopped paying the license fee. I no longer watch live TV just for that very reason, because I refuse to fund the BBC. It's annoying. It's why am I paying? Why am I paying for this?
Because you distrusted it because of the Brexit issue.
Well, that's when I started. That's when I saw, because I'm a Brexiter and I'm waiting for my point of view to be represented, and they go blah blah blah. All right, thank you, no more time. What? So what about my point of view? What am I paying for? Why I'm not even asking for the majority of the time, although we won the blooming referendum, and I suppose we should have had 51% of the time. I mean, we didn't have 7%. We had 6%, I believe. What's that about?
getting back to the topic in question about mistrusting the mass media. I don't know whether you've I mean, we'll share it with our audience, obviously. There was a video that was put together about US media
The channels, all the
channels.
different channels,
Yeah,
all saying the
actually
same thing.
repeating the words verbatim. It was
I love that.
incredible. And literally, they overlaid the
Yep.
different companies, and they were literally word for word saying the same thing.
Yep.
Now, what I found along those lines, because it sounded like, oh my God, they're all controlled. Well, in reality, they're all owned. There's a big chunk of them owned by one company
Mm-hmm.
called the Sinclair Group.
Mm-hmm.
And they own 193 different stations across the US, and which make up over 100 markets, and that's 40% of American households. So they're all being fed from one source. And what happened, they when this broke, where all these stations literally repeated word for word everything they were being told, and they had to. They actually challenged it, mind you, but they were told it was a forced announcement from the Sinclair Group. So every single one of these 193 stations all literally regurgitated the same text word for word. Now, if you weren't aware that this was coming from one source who dictated this to them, and you happen to see a few channels all word for word repeating the same thing, you think, what's going on here? And there was a bit of a conspiracy about it, thinking that the mass media is totally controlled. But the justification was for this narrative, this one piece. That's what they're saying. It was this one piece that the Sinclair Group, dictated to their radio stations. So it's almost like, newspapers, sometimes they make a mistake and they apologize. So they have to put out an addendum or something, and they hide it on page 12 or something in a newspaper where they apologize word for word what they're supposed to do. Now, obviously, for the radio outlets, they had to read it out, but they weren't reading it out. This is the thing. It didn't look like this is come from our group. We want to make sure it's the word for word and we'll read it out. So they're reading something out from above. No, the way that it came across was in the natural order of, them broadcasting. So the recipient would think, oh yeah, that's them giving it in their own words. But every other station was repeating exactly the same. And that's what made it so compelling. So if our audience out there haven't seen this, we will share this alongside our show in the blurb, so you can watch it yourself. And the New York Times, if you well, I've got the article here, so we will share it from the New York Times. So established places where you can actually get to see that particular recording and see how it was. So in a way, that in particular is one example that would certainly turn people off in a distrusting way, thinking they're all in cahoots. They're pushing out a narrative that we're all expected to take as lemmings. And
I never thought, and my access to that video never suggested that it was anything but what the Americans would call a syndicated broadcast, because these Sinclair Group, people like that, like Fox and so on and so forth, they have, well, in Britain, as we would say, a franchise.
Yeah.
Americans would say it's a syndication. So they've got all these sub stations.
Yeah.
And they broadcast the same thing to these substations. And the substations regurgitate these things as they, I think, quite a lot of the times, as they see fit.
Mm-hmm.
So I never thought for a second that it was anything but a syndication, but it was to me and the people that I was, if you like, taking this off from was, wow, look at just how many of them are syndicated. Were you aware that it was this number? And so, actually, do you have access to non-syndicated news? And then when you hear that 90% of all the outlets are owned by just 6 companies, then the answer is no, you don't have access to non-syndicated news. You've got to go to the citizen journalist. You've got to go to, well, now, Tucker Carlson, not before, but now Tucker Carlson. You've got to go to Jimmy Dore. You've got to go to who else again? You know,
Independents that have
you have to
gone
go.
on their own.
You've got to go to independents, and if you are an independent, you got to be really careful. Scott Ritter was a well-known independent. Now he's a very bombastic ex-Marine, and he's got this. I don't know if you're aware. I'm sure. I think everybody must be aware. Americans have a very militaristic way of speaking, anyway. But those of them who have been in the American military, they're even more militaristic, and they've got this kind of almost very nearly elegant but very catchy way of stringing powerful phrases together, which are quite militaristic. You know, you'll be interdicted and sort of like interdict. You'll be so you interdict and demolish and annihilate the enemy on the field of battle. And you know, they've got this way of speaking. You just think, my God, you know, it's quite catchy, and he's an expert at it. And he was really drawing down on the drawing that. Well, I'll use the expression, not that it means anything. It was drawing down on the Ukrainian-Russian conflict and exposing many aspects of it militarily to lay people like myself, and making waves. And all of a sudden, YouTube decided, no thanks, no more, you're gone. And I think his either 1 point something million or 2 point something or however million subscribers he had, all gone. All his videos disappeared.
Oh, wow.
He became a non-person overnight. And the latest thing that has happened is that all of a sudden he's been accused of. We probably need to, for YouTube, we need to take that out. He's been accused of having interesting videos with a 15-year-old, which he strenuously denies, because it turns out that the 15-year-old was actually an FBI agent or something.
Oh.
Yes. So
a mole.
Someone who's just is just supposedly doing his job, and for some funny reason was actually in contact with Mr. Ritter. Colonel Ritter, whatever he is, Colonel retired, whatever he is. And it puts you in mind of sort of the thing about Russell Brand. All of a sudden, you know, this person who's a pest in the side of the pest in the side, that's wrong. What's the expression? Something in the side, the saw in the side. I think this is the expression. In the side of, I've got to look up my idioms and get back with it. It was a pain in the side of the government, of these governments. All of a sudden, they seem to always run into sort of accusations, which may or may not pan out. The trouble is, mud sticks.
Yeah.
You know,
the court of social media rather than the court of law.
Precisely. It's I love what Rumble said. He said, "Hang on," because you remember the MP.
YouTube have stopped Russell Brand's income. And we're talking about him in particular.
Precisely.
Literally just stopped it based on rumor and innuendo. There's no actual, he hasn't been charged.
He doesn't even promote a licentious lifestyle.
No.
He actually talks about politics now. So what's the connection? And then that woman, that lady, whoever her name was, that wrote, she's an MP, isn't she?
Yeah, she is, yeah.
She wrote to Rumble, and Rumble wrote back and said, why is a British parliamentarian writing about this sort of thing? He hasn't even been charged.
Yes,
he hasn't even been charged with something.
I know.
And even if it was charged, he hasn't been found guilty. And if he had been found guilty, that's not what his videos are about.
No.
What's the connection?
It's incredible. I'm really shocked at YouTube. I mean, I'm not a fan of Russell Brand. I'm going to say that now. I'm not. I mean, he obviously his past may have been quite murky, and we don't know whether or not he's
He was a
committed
man
what he's done.
bad around town. I mean,
Well, we don't
unless
know if he stepped too far, and it sounds he was an unsavoury character anyway. But we're supposed to
I'll
be,
say
we're
guy.
supposed to be a country of law and order. We don't.
Due process.
Well, yeah, due process of
Due
law and
process.
order.
That is what I always felt distinguished us from the banana republics. That we had due process. You were accused of something. You had a right to a lawyer. You got your lawyer. You had your day in court.
You had your
And then whatever
evidence.
happened, sorry?
You had to back up with evidence and what have you, and they had
You
to
had your day in
prove
court.
it. Yeah,
You had to prove it. So everybody was like, it's fine because I believe in due process and this country practices due process. I'm not afraid of anything.
yeah.
But nowadays, what due process?
I know.
What due process?
Well, I mean, the media. Going back to our topic in question, the main media. It's almost like after the pandemic, where there were certain things that you couldn't talk about. So that was censorship. Now,
Yep.
I get it that they were trying to stop disinformation, which is understandable, but you couldn't speak about it. It's almost self-censorship that you couldn't say certain words because the different channels would stamp on it immediately and not give you a voice. So we had no voice. It's almost like you cannot not challenge, but even say anything because it's deemed as against the establishment. And so in that case, you don't have a voice. Now, granted, things have loosened since the end of the pandemic, thankfully, but this mistrusting of the mass media is linked along this because we have a tendency to disbelieve what they say because they have a particular narrative and you now can't oppose that narrative. And that's where we're slowly creeping towards a can I say this? A fascist, yeah, a fascist society. How can we move to this? We sleepwalking to it. And the example of Russell Brand, where this minister wanted him closed down with no evidence, just accusations.
Just an accusation.
It's incredible how we've moved to this scenario. I don't get it.
I'm not even sure it's an accusation, is it? I mean, formally, because he hasn't been formally charged. So is this
He
an
hasn't been
accusation?
charged. No, he hasn't.
So it's actually wants him shut down based on a rumor, which is
Well,
essentially
the newspapers did the digging. Those people have not even gone to the police, and the newspapers are saying, "Oh, well, they didn't go to the police because they felt unsafe to do so." So it was up to the journalists to dig it up. I mean,
unsafe in what sense?
indeed.
So- and when you say, my original point was when we started talking about this, I said, if you want to fight disinformation, the way we used to fight disinformation was to show that it was nonsense. The idea of a Soviet haven where everyone was happy, everyone had social security, we could actually go to the Soviet Union and sneak out videos of people going, nah,
no,
it's
it's
terrible
not like
here
that.
to be
Yeah.
honest. It's not like, and that's how you fight disinformation. And if you can't fight it that way, maybe it isn't disinformation. Maybe it's the truth. And so maybe you shouldn't be suppressing it. Maybe you're going, okay, hang on, government. I think they've got a point.
But
Right? Like, for instance, now, when it comes to COVID, I don't listen to either side because I have zero idea of who the heck is telling the truth. So I've just given up and just a plague on all your houses. I don't want to know about it. So I'm getting that way to be with the climate change thing. You don't allow free debate. So I can't follow what's going on. Sometimes these people are censored. At other times, other people are censored. And I don't even know who to believe any longer. This is the problem. So it's like, do you know what? I don't care. A plague on all your houses. This is the danger. This is where we are. So I sent you a link, which you're going to share with with our audience, and this is from the
The
New
New
Yorker.
Yorker. Yeah, I've got this one. Why Americans have lost
When
faith. Yeah.
when Americans
Oh,
lost faith in
when.
news.
Yeah.
When. And the amazing thing, this was published on the 30th of January 2023. I was interested. I was reading this with interest. The amazing thing about this is where you talk about come off it, is that the article blames, guess who? Donald Trump.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's the New Yorker blames Donald Trump and says it is Donald Trump's White House that destroyed faith in American on purpose. And you're thinking to yourself, do you guys actually even do you own a mirror? Have you ever looked in the mirror? Because metaphorically speaking, there'll be something very interesting in there. It's nothing to do with Donald Trump now. The whole idea that you can actually blame Donald Trump for the loss of faith. If anything, it was because he was victimized by to a certain extent by
Even now. But yeah.
not even now. That we lost faith. Because I mean, do we think really that these court cases against him are genuine?
Well, the ones about the property and that, they're all civil cases. They're not
Yeah.
they're
Why
not
did they pop up
cases.
now?
Yeah, exactly. And I know people say he's got Teflon shoulders and nothing sticks, but it could be that there isn't anything to stick, because these are all. I mean, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. You've heard me say
I
that
know.
on other previous shows. I'm not a fan of him at all. I do not like him,
Neither
and
am
the
I.
way
Neither.
he behaves. I think he's not a great leader, but that's just my opinion. But that doesn't mean, again, that he should be chastised and closed down in the manner that things have gone on. It's just not right. We've across the whole Western world, we seem to be hell bent on shutting people down with a voice that's slightly different from the narrative, which is what most other people are following. But sometimes that path doesn't necessarily mean that's the only path. You sometimes have to question where you're at, and some people come along and question it. So you should take it into account. Oh yeah, did I make a good point? It's almost like you're not even listening to that. Go, no, you're not on the right path. We have to squash you. That's fascism or
It's
communism.
fascism. You
It's
can't
just
run a democracy like that, because we're supposed to have a market of ideas, and then we're supposed to choose from out of that market of ideas which way we want to vote. But if you're not allowing a market of ideas, do we have a democracy?
no. You can say you haven't, have
And
you?
you've heard that, I don't know if you're aware of this, that the judge valued Mar-a-Lago, his
Yes.
place
There's a-
in Florida, at 18 million.
Yeah, and he says it's
But
worth a
he
billion.
actually, I don't know about a billion, but
He said a billion.
Well, okay, I don't know. That's probably
It's nonsense.
yeah.
That's a
Well,
bit too much.
but what's this chap's name now? It's not Jimmy Dore. It was someone else. Another one of these other Judge Napolitano. Is that how you say? Because you're
Napolitano
Italian.
is right, yeah.
Judge Napolitano. He's one of these famous YouTubers and everything. And on his show, he got someone, a lawyer or someone that's come in and talk about it. Apparently, it was actually bought for 30 million,
30.
30 million, and then it's been restored. He bought another piece of land and added to it, so it's much larger than originally it was, and furnished with antique furniture from various periods and everything. So at the very least, I don't know about this being a billion, but at the very least, it's not 18 million. It's not lower than when
But there's also an issue there when he asked for the loans. It was based before a lot of this happened, and also it was before he was the president. So obviously, because it's his abode, the value of it will go up anyway. So if you're looking
yes,
you're looking at the price of the property now, you could probably quite easily say it's worth 100 million with the additional stuff. But remember, when the loans were taken out, there was none of this. So he overinflated those properties to gain preferential loans bigger than
So
he should
is
have done.
that who's suing him?
Well,
Because I
this is
understand that
interesting. I'm still
I understand it was a
unclear.
DA. It was
Yeah,
a DA. For
yeah.
what?
It-
The people that gave him the loan, they're not the ones suing him.
No, they're not. I don't get it.
So
I think it's
what's
just
it got to do with you?
I know. I don't understand this whole process about this civil court case about him lying about his. It's just almost something to pin on Trump. They literally
Right.
they are
So
trying
what has
something
the
to pin on him.
MSM done? What the mainstream media? What have they said about it to ask those kind of questions that we are asking? That's why people don't trust the MSM. Where are the CNNs, the BBCs? Going, what the heck is going on here? Back in the old days, I think there had been a major fuss,
Yeah,
but now there's nothing. It's just tumbleweed.
that's what's
But
wrong.
you can use your brain and go, well, what the hell is going on here? I can use my brain. Some people argue I don't have one, but what the hell? And I can ask. I
I haven't leaked that. Honest, I haven't.
I haven't leaked it. Yeah, and then we draw from that certain conclusions about the media. That's where we're at.
I'm with you. I mean, there's so you don't know what to trust, and a lot of people, unfortunately, because of the distrust of the mass media, they're going to alternative places to get their news. But unfortunately, some of those alternatives are social media, and that's no good either, because anyone and his dog could put anything on there and doesn't make it fact. So it people still have to be careful where they're choosing to get their news from. Yes, they're mistrusting the mass media, but you also don't want to go to the scrape in the barrel to get your news, because that's when it can be, as Donald Trump's famous words, fake news. It can be made up and tarnished and not clear, not unbiased. For all the failings of a lot of the mass media, they do try and follow a particular pattern
No,
of,
they don't.
well, they're supposed to, and
Well, that's better.
impartial. They're
They're meant
supposed
to be, but they're not. And look, we all know that if you have a right-wing point of view, you tend to listen to Fox News in America, and if you have a left-wing point of view, you tend to listen to CNN and MSNBC. I don't know about ABC, but probably leftist too. I think Fox is about the only right-wing,
predominantly
leaning.
right wing. Yeah.
right, predominantly right-wing. So if you already know, I mean, look here in the UK, we've got the Guardian, we've got, was it the Mail?
The Mail is right wing.
Yeah, I'm saying we got different wings.
Yes.
So you sort of know what paper is where, and you can put. So the Independent, is it really independent? Nowadays, I think that once upon a time was
more
kind of,
left leaning now, isn't it?
it's now more left leaning. So where do you go? So at the end of the day, I think you just. I go to certain Ukrainian websites, but I'm expecting to hear news given a certain way. But I think it's important to go and watch those and to read
Ukrainian or Russian?
those. Ukrainian.
Okay.
I also go to. I don't actually go to anyone who's overtly. Well, I do. No, I think I lie. No, I do. I do follow a couple of Russian type of websites, and then you take, what this one says and what that one says, and you look at it, and then I think you kind of come out with some kind of a view of what's going on. But you have people who are the comments that I read on some of these YouTube channels. It's just astonishing. It's people's biases.
Well, they've been
And they're
fed only
so
one
overwhelming.
particular narrative, and that's all they
But
know.
they graduate also because of their own biases. They graduate to one side, don't they?
It's
So
difficult to
it's
change that, though.
It's very
Unconscious bias, though. Once you've been fed a particular narrative, very difficult to change that narrative. You really have to throw in an enormous amount of evidence, and even then, people will still poo-poo it. A bit like your friend that we were discussing prior to the show, where he believes a particular thing, and no matter what other people have shown as evidence, it doesn't align with him, because he's got a belief now that this is how it is. His worldview is this. It can't be changed. So that's not very flexible thinking. You should always keep your mind open for different things and assess it individually. Like you said, you want to get different viewpoints and then make an opinion based on those viewpoints. Which one do you feel is more credible? And that way you can then have a viewpoint based on that information. But when we are, like I said, when we're only fed one narrative, very difficult to have an alternative point of view.
Well, speaking of that friend of mine, well, it's not actually a friend, but speaking of that gentleman who has a YouTube channel, he has a constant interlocutor who always comments on his videos, who is very anti that position. And one day I asked this other interlocutor, I said to him, what evidence could I produce for you that would convince you about this point of view to which you don't agree? And he couldn't come up with anything. So there is no evidence. So both of them are very stuck in their point of view. And they're very civil. They're never angry or rude,
insulting
or
to one another.
No.
Yeah, okay. That's the right way of doing it, though.
It's the right way of doing it.
Indeed.
Now, speaking about our topic here, there is this Dutch farmers.
Oh yeah, that's really what I want to talk about media blackout as well. It's like a separate topic, but still linked to this, about the blackout. There was a media blackout about the Dutch farmers. Now, maybe our listeners here are going, what Dutch farmers?
Well, that's
exactly, media blackout. Yeah, it was not brought up. Do you want to elaborate on the story, what actually happened?
No, you always tell stories better than I do.
Well, apparently the Dutch farmers were causing a massive uproar, and something was put forward by the Dutch government. The farmers were in protest about it, and they were causing all sorts of problems in Holland, Netherlands, regarding this issue, but it wasn't reported anywhere. Nowhere. You literally had a media blackout across Europe. No one was reporting that the Dutch farmers were rebelling almost. They had convoys of tractors going into the cities, trying to stop the government from functioning and all sorts of things. You'd have thought that this would have made the news somewhere, but nobody reported on it at all. And it was based on a new law that the Dutch government was trying to introduce to reduce emissions. And in so doing, a lot of farmers would have lost their land, would have lost their cattle because of this emissions target. And so they were up in arms because their livelihoods would be affected. And and it was never actually reported until much later after it finished. Not at the time, which was really, really strange.
Especially depending on which news outlet you went to. So what I've done is I would like us to compare two news outlets. The first being the BBC. I'll send you a link on it.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, about 3 or 4 months after the case. This was in
it's much
BBC.
later, wasn't it? Yeah.
Much later.
This went on actually in which was in early March sometime, wasn't it?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
And so it was only reported by some outlets in July and August. It's like, what? Yeah.
And in July, the BBC is talking about where's that thing on? Right,
over emissions, yeah.
They're protesting over emissions cuts. That's a very nice way of putting it. And then we go over to this citizen.
The
Actually,
grey
they're not
zone.
citizen. Yeah,
The
the gray
grey
zone.
zone. Yeah.
The gray zone. And that says no farms, no food. Confront billionaire green elite's food system
Reset.
reset plan. So emissions versus food system reset plan. One sounds a lot more serious than the other. Emissions sounds like a minor argument.
Yeah.
But a food system reset plan makes you want to dig into it and think, well, hang on.
I think the headline though was a little bit flamboyant for the second one, because the reason why they went with that article was because the Dutch farmers were saying that if we have to comply with these green, and I put for our listening audience who don't know, I'm putting the little quotation marks around the green,
Yeah, yes.
the green word. It's because the green thing where they're trying to reduce farms, reduce cattle, so we move to more sustainable food, i.e. bugs and things. That's a long-term goal, so that we reduce the number of livestock for farmers, so farmers will go out of business. And so it's viewed as the green elite's food system, where they want to do away with traditional food, which is cattle and meat, and go to bugs and vegetables, and that's our only source of food. And so farmers will go out of business, there'll be no food, and that's the headline that they've gone for. So again, the headline is the grabber, and it works because it certainly grabs you in when you see no farms. If there's no farms, there's going to be no food. But that isn't the actual what was being proposed, but it's somewhere in between.
So there's a conspiracy theory that the World Economic Forum, and those at the top, want to reduce our population, human population, to about 500 million. And the way to do that is to cause mass starvation. And the way to do that is to control the food supply. Now, that's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
If that is what they're planning, I doubt very much they're going to be open about it. So we have to look at evidence and ask questions. Now, the other thing I was going to try to
I'd like to see the evidence of this 500 million figure, where I've never seen any of it. So the people who report this conspiracy have to show more evidence as to where this supposed quote came from, where the World Economic Forum actually wants to reduce the world population. I think it was taken out of context again to make a headline. That was a if I remember rightly, but don't quote me on this, I think the reason that figure was mooted was this would happen to the population if we didn't do something about it. So if we let society behave as it is, the greenhouse effects would then affect the world populations, and our world populations could, and it was just a could drop to as low as 500 million. So not the fact that they were trying to impose this and say, oh yeah, let's reduce our population, but this could be the effects of a problem with global warming, and that's why they want to do something about it now, reduce those emissions, not to decimate farmers. But people are obviously using it in the wrong way. We don't need the vast majority of the population. See, that's not what was said. But okay.
It was said by somebody called Harari. Well, there's some unnecessary characterizations of his lifestyle, which are not relevant to the discussion, but are obviously introduced. So this is the other thing. This is where you were talking about. We used to have news organizations that held themselves to certain standards. Unfortunately, because they've let themselves go, the space has been filled up by people who don't have similar standards. No, excuse me, I
Indeed.
got a cough tickle. Yes. So exactly as you were saying, it's unfortunate because we have to lower our standards to some degree just to get alternative news. As you can see in this article, which I think you will share, called "We Don't Need the Vast Majority of the Population,"
Which was never said, by the way.
Well, if you look here, I think that's the whole point. Is it that someone did say during
Well,
one of these?
no, because if you read this article as well, he's talking about Klaus Schwab. He's the Bond villain who runs the WEF. I mean, you don't refer to him as a Bond villain. And also, he was saying about, where was he saying about some of the language in this article? You sort of think, really?
Oh, it says here. Let me quote. Recently, we got some insight on why the WEF is doing what it is doing, particularly with attacks on hydrocarbons for promotion of the vaccines. Yuval Noah Harari, one of the top advisors of the World Economic Forum, which is the WEF, claims we are moving towards a world where we will not need most of the people who are currently alive. Harari, an Israeli national and history professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, was interviewed by Chris Anderson as part of TED's audio collective. That's a link. You can click on the link and go to the audio. Said that we simply, quote again, open quote, don't need the vast majority of the population, close quote. He called for human beings to be replaced by machines whenever possible, saying that people are just no longer useful to the global elite and their agenda, close quote. So someone who is actually an advisor to the WEF has openly said we don't need most of the world's population. And I think further down, I actually saw where the actual number 500 million came from.
Yeah, I saw that, but that's not a quote. It's his sum up. The WEF, by contrast, seems intent on reducing Earth's population of 6 billion people, which is incorrect, by the way, it's more than that, to about 500 million. And then he goes on to slate Harari to say that he's a homosexual, blah, blah, blah,
No,
blah.
I didn't want to mention all
well,
that. That's what I
but
just said.
this is what I'm saying. You've got to take that article.
Put some unnecessary.
Yeah, you have to take the article for what it is, and you do have to wonder what the incentive of this scriptural pivotal. It's a scriptural.
I don't have time to read the article,
but we need to
this
sum
this
up as
actually
well.
this last link looks promising. So I'll put it in, and then we'll see whether it's worth publishing it or not. But it's certainly
okay. I'm mindful of the time because we have gone over. So what do you want to summarise regarding trusting the media and this blackout? What's your overall view of?
I don't think the media is trustworthy. The mass media. Let's be very clear. We're talking about the legacy mass media, the big boys. I'm not talking about citizen journalists and smaller outlets, bijou outlets, which I suppose might. I mean, you do have single issue outlets who are very biased, but the thing is, it's clear that they are biased, and I don't think they hide it. So you know what you're getting when you get onto those media. So in some sense, you understand that you will be exposed to bias. But the ones who pretend to not be biased, whereas they really are, they're a problem. By and large, right? There's so much disinformation on it. Like I said about COVID, and I said about the global warming. I've just gotten to the point where I don't trust anyone.
I think part of the media, the mass media in particular, yes, they do have a particular narrative. However, you have to almost look and listen to the information that's provided and disseminate it on the fly and have that skill set. And that's very difficult to do because you have to critique it as you're listening to it. So that way you can listen to all of it and then critique it as best you can as you're listening to it. Although that's difficult because you then have to take it and analyze it on the fly, which is tough to do. But yeah, everyone's got a bias. Human nature has a bias and outlets have a bias. They all do. So yeah, do we stop trusting mass media? Maybe not trusting it, but being able to take it with a pinch of salt. I think that's the best approach.
Even listen to them. I don't even listen to them. It's been donkey years since I watched anything. I just watch clips, and that's all I can stand. I can't stand to listen to watch the whole thing.
Okay. Unfortunately, we could go on at length here, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of the show for another week.